God will only give you so much you can handle. That's not true, right? God will give you more than you can handle. You got to lean on God to handle it.
Yep.
And so I feel like that's David's bread and butter the entire
that's
time.
good,
And we're going to sin every day, but are you going to lean on God for forgiveness and grace during that?
Hey, y'all, welcome to the Pointman podcast. My name is Zach. I'm the Pointman pastor here at that church, and I'm excited for a new week of Act Like a Man, Act Like Men.
Yep.
Our new message series that we have kicked off here on the podcast, and we'll be carrying through our semester on January the 17th. Today, we are talking about a dude that, if you didn't know, takes up a large section of the Old Testament.
Yes.
A man by the name of David. He's known for a lot of things in the Bible, and we're going to get into the things he's known for, why he's significant. We're going to talk about maybe some things he screwed up, maybe some places he came up short, and how we can kind of connect that to us as men in today's world. So without further ado, let's just get into Daniel or David.
I did the same thing earlier.
This morning before service, he was like, "Hey, we're getting ready to talk about Daniel," and I was like, "Hey, the other one."
The
Yeah,
D
David.
games, man, they get you.
Yeah,
They trick you up.
Deuteronomy. No.
I don't think that one tricks me up over David and Daniel.
Well, was Zerubbabel? What was that?
Zerubbabel.
Yeah, today. That's
Yeah.
what Scott was talking about.
That's got a lot of vowels here.
Yeah. Call him Z.
King David, better known as, I guess he is better known as the King David more than anything else.
Unless you look at David and Goliath.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. So, like, he is a shepherd foremost, and then he was a poet.
Yep.
And he played the heck of a harp, I heard.
He was a musician.
He's a musician.
Musician.
Close enough.
That's the one.
Gotcha.
Giant killer.
Yep.
And then he was the ancestor of Jesus.
Yep.
True that.
And the father to Solomon.
Yes. The
wisest man to ever
person
live.
who ever lived.
Yeah.
I know we're going to dive into a lot of his story today, but like I was reading this week to get ready for this, and like my Bible's pretty thick, and it's like a pretty thick part.
Yeah.
If you look up his whole story, it's massive.
Come on, man.
Takes up a lot of the Old Testament.
It was funny.
First and Second Samuel, and then all like half of Psalms, right?
Yeah. So his story, if you're looking
Right.
it up, and you want to read it at home, which I encourage you to read it. That's like one of our things we need to really start pushing. I feel like is like read it, read the Bible. Like I want you to read. I'm going to read it. We're going to read it, but we want you guys to read it. But his story is from 1 Samuel 16, and it runs all the way through to 1 Kings 2.
If you don't even get out of 1 Samuel,
Just read 1 Samuel.
there's so much inside of the story that really defines who David is that you don't even have to get into the later things. Now, we see his kind of downfall, if you will, and that does come in Kings. And we see some things happen as he becomes a king. But in the infancy of this story of who David is, we see some really, really cool stuff. Of course, we start really with who he is as David versus Goliath, which I one thing I thought was interesting in this story. Actually, no. Let's back up even a step before David and Goliath. It's when David is anointed as the king. That's the first real significant point where we start to see him, because
He was protected at that time.
his dad hit him.
Yeah.
His dad hit him. He didn't want him to be on the line for anointing.
Very, very similar to someone in the New Testament.
Very much so. Yeah.
So we saw this again when we talked about Noah, about like the last born. I don't know. I mean, I'm a last born, so I kind of hype up that, that analogy as
He has
well.
like 8 brothers and
Yeah,
sisters.
a lot of older brothers, and they were like,
7 brothers.
and they were all like bigger and stronger than he was. So they're like, this has got to be the king. And they're
He's
like,
a
no,
runt.
it's the little runt guy, So I can really relate.
I liked 1 Samuel 16 verse 7 says, "But the Lord said to Samuel, do not look on his appearance or on the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For the Lord sees not a man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart."
The heart,
which I thought was really,
And
really
we all know what
profound.
David's known for. Having a
man
after
He's
God's
a man,
own heart.
man after God's heart.
I love that.
Yes,
Is that right?
man after God's heart.
Yeah. So like when you look at like right before that story where he goes and gets anointed, Samuel is kind of like he's not the king, but he's the first, like he's a judge or a ruler.
Judge.
Yeah.
And then Saul takes over as king, and then he gets the reins from Saul eventually.
Yeah.
Even though there's a lot of turmoil there in the middle parts.
They were like, we want a king. We want a king.
Right.
Everyone else has a king. We should have a king.
Yeah, we should have a king. And God's like, Fine, we'll give him a king.
Yeah.
And then Saul just really tanks. He tanks it bad. So that's why David has to kind of take over. But David and Goliath, I feel like, is the good starting point of the whole story, because that's what everybody knows David
Vacation
for.
Bible School, they teach you that.
David and Goliath.
Yeah.
Before every sports analogy,
I
you
love
always
the
hear
rabbit
David
hole
and Goliath.
that takes down, like where that connects to later on in David's journey of where he ends up hiding again and finding is it Goliath's brother's sword or
No, it's actually
Goliath's sword.
It's a sword, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm like, there's not supposed to be any weapons in here.
I'm telling y'all, this is another incredible season of a Bible Old Testament TV show. Like,
Oh yeah, no doubt about
yeah,
it.
absolutely.
his life and the things he goes through. When we look at David and Goliath, one of the things that stood out to me studying it through for this was that the whole reason that David is going to the front line to in the first place where he meets Goliath is essentially his dad wants to know that his brothers are okay.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, here, take this food, take these things, but bring a token back to let me know how they're doing, to make sure that they're okay. So really, as a dad, I could see this where it's like, I just want to know how my kids are doing.
Yeah.
So like, but that's why David's there in the first place. Because his dad sent him off from the fields to the front lines.
Yeah.
To
and
be a part of this.
the armor that he was supposed to have didn't even fit him.
Yeah.
You know?
That's something they hype up in the Sunday school version of this. It's like the big,
Put the big armor on him.
Yeah.
He's sitting there like, I can't move around in this.
which it is in the Bible, but I don't feel like it's that significant as much as it's just like it didn't fit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Saul tries to give David his armor. He's like, you're too small, you're too little, you can't fight this giant Goliath that we need killed because we're just sitting here stagnant. We can't go fight these Philistines because they're too big, too bad. And then David's like, shoot, I'll do it.
It's a great object lesson. We heard that word, it's a trigger word, but
yeah,
it's like, little dude.
Yeah, so I wanted to read that verse.
Kevin Hart out there versus, Shaquille O'Neal.
Yes. I like First Samuel 17:36. Your servant has struck down both lions and bears, and the uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, for he has defied armies of the living God. I don't know if that's what you were about to pull up.
It wasn't. It was another point that I had, which is really good. I wasn't going to bring it up yet, but it's like he overcame and he knew he could take Goliath because God had delivered him in the past.
Yeah, that's good.
From things that are even worse than Goliath, like a bear. I mean, bear's not a giant man, but I feel like if I'm facing a bear versus a guy, I would rather take the guy on.
I'm way more scared of the bear than
100%. Yeah.
Or a lion.
Yeah. As an avid hunter, I carry a weapon on me when I hunt the Washtenaw Mountains. We don't have grizzlies in Arkansas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just not going to go up against a bear.
No chance.
Yeah.
And so I feel like he used that, like, God got me through. I clubbed a lion to death and I clubbed a bear to death. So like, what's this guy going to do to me?
What's this big dude?
Yeah.
God's got me. I'm not scared of him. But the line I was going to read was the 1 Samuel 17:37, and he said, actually that was the line.
Yeah, that was the line.
He said, it was the next one where he talks about, who is this guy who defiles us? I have God. Let's go out there and kill him. I gotta find the actual verse. I didn't write it down in my notes. But
there's some other scripture that kind of like, if we have God who's like who's against us,
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. That's
so good.
The history buffs will say how big Goliath was, and we all can argue on that. But still, he's the biggest guy within the Philistine army.
It's the same thing we talked about when we talked about Noah. Like at some point, there's things in the Bible, and it's like, okay, he's a giant.
Yeah.
The Bible said he's a giant.
Let's say David's 5'6", and this guy's 8 foot tall. That's a giant to him.
Let's say he's 6'6".
Yeah.
He's big. He's a big
Lincoln
dude.
height,
He's beating up everybody.
Yeah.
So let's just move on and understand that this little shepherd dude who was too small for his dad to bring him to the lineup for anointing.
Yeah.
So he didn't even want him there, but he's going to go fight the biggest dude of the Philistine army. I don't really care how big he is.
I want to know the
It's
lesson.
irrelevant
I
to
want to know the lesson behind it.
The lesson is he goes and he kills the dude.
Yeah, with a supposed sling.
Yeah. That's what the Bible says.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I have one of those.
Yeah, smokes him in the forehead with the rock, and it just stumbles
And
and
plants him.
Yeah.
falls.
Little Uzi Vert on him.
Yeah. I have so there's a company that makes them out of kind of like a twine rope, and it's from Guam, and I bought 2 of them.
The heck is a Guam? I thought Guam was a country.
Guam's a country. They make them in Guam.
Okay.
They send them over here. But I have.
So is Guam a thing, or is it just a country?
Guam's a country, but they make them in Guam. That's where they're from. The sling.
He said the sling's called a Guam because it's made in Guam.
Oh,
Yeah.
I thought you said that they make them with twine and Guam, not in Guam. I was like,
No, they make them in Guam.
we haven't clarified, is Guam a place or a thing in this conversation? I got you. I'm with you now.
Sling made in the country of Guam.
Okay.
Nickname Guam. So yeah, I
And
have
kills
one.
Goliath.
Yeah, and kills Goliath. I have one of those. I actually had 2 of them, and they're intense.
Yeah.
The sound it makes, the crack it makes, it would scare the mess out of you. But the I guess the pounds per square inch when it hits something. I dent car hoods with it. Just, I mean, not randomly places, but like a junk car hood. So imagine that hitting a human skin skull.
Do you think? Just think about the movie cutscene here of like him walking up to throw the stone. It's like back to his childhood, and he's like practicing in the backyard, to whip the stone.
Yeah, or then the flash is back and he's beating the bear to death with the club.
It's like one of those like gladiator cutscenes, like where it's like back to
some Achilles over there.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. Artemis Maximus.
So David, so this is verse 26, 16:6 or 17:6. David asked the soldiers standing by, "What will a man get for killing his Philistine and ending the defense of Israel?" So they tell him like, "You're actually going to get a lot for doing this." And David's like, I feel like he really doesn't even care about those things. I don't know if that's like a main point of it, but like he's able to get like all these riches and fame, and he's like, I really don't care about that.
It's for country.
The only thing I care about is somebody who is defying God and standing there in front of everybody who is saying, I don't care about your God, I don't care about your people Israel. That's the reason I want to take this guy down. Not because of me or not because of the things I'm going to get. I feel like that's something that we can like really like aspire to be like. We can work for all these things and get all these things, but in the end, the thing you need to conquer is the thing that's defying God.
Yeah. Well, if you think about a lot of the stories we read in the Old Testament, there's a theme of that where it's like there's great reward for doing the work, but all of the people, the great men that we read about in situations such as this, have that same kind of like, I'm doing this for God.
Yeah, the righteous heart.
Right. Like, this is not I don't want to earn something. Yeah. This is like the prize is being faithful.
Yeah, we always learn that pride is, the downfall of man. That's like the biggest sin. You got to go on from there.
Yep.
But if you're, we all know what David's faults are. We'll get into that. Yep. But as long as you come back to what is your mission the entire time.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah.
But imperfection is part of all these stories. That's the whole point.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's one of the greatest pieces of this. So, to think about that, one of the things about Goliath that is not in the Sunday school version is that he goes and he cuts his head off.
Yep. That
Gangster.
Yes.
Being a new guy who, I was like, what?
Yeah, gangster. It's like not enough that you just implanted a stone in this dude's head. He cuts it off.
Him, Jeez.
Yeah, so not only, they cut his head off, and then he like drags his head throughout the city and like.
So it's got to be a little heavy
too.
Got to be.
It's got to be a little.
He dragged it.
He drug it.
Put it on a pike and carried it around.
It was in the Bible. He drag it, drug it.
And then as soon as all the Israelites saw that he had killed them, then they were like, "It's on like Donkey Kong.
Yeah,
let's go out there and kill him." And then as soon as they were able to kill them, he was able to kill Goliath. That's when like the soldiers went out there and started attacking and started winning, and they were like retreating. They're like, if David can take down our biggest and baddest guy, we're not going to stand a chance.
Right.
And I feel like that's a really like awesome part of the story that you don't always read is like they went out there and killed everybody after that.
Oh yeah, Goliath. We found out Goliath later on had a brother too that was just as vicious too. So like this is a statement.
I would make a point. Like I think the story is talked a lot of times like it's the little guy versus the big guy. I don't think that's really that important.
I was thinking that exact same thing today.
Yeah, it's not, I don't think that's really the focus here.
No.
Could you take that out of it? Sure, but I think that really the focus here is it's a faithful person who's willing to step out on his faith.
Yes.
No matter how big he is. I think it's kind of like the piece where we understand that he's the smallest, the youngest, the runt. I think that's more like, okay, it's going to be even more difficult for him to do this, but I don't think his size matters as much as we like to play it up in like the Sunday school version.
Mission matters over the characteristics of somebody.
Yeah, so you said that, and I was reading the story, and I was like, dude, it's the exact opposite. If you think of like how it actually is in real life, Goliath had to go up against God.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that's the more of the story, and you're like, man, David's so awesome, he's so little, and took him out, took Goliath out, but you're like, Goliath had to go up against God, who created everything and who is the God of everything, and like he had no chance. Just plicked him.
Because where's the verse where it's like who? Oh yeah, it's in verse 36. For he has defied the armies of the living God.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's not even like you're right. It's like hey, it's one versus the universe essentially.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like good luck, homie.
Yeah. So I was like, it kind of, not really brings the story down because the story is awesome and however you do it, but like that is the main story that you don't realize when the underneath story of like it's the opposite. Mm-hmm. It's David was way bigger, way badder than anything.
That foreshadows everything into the New Testament. Like that brings that whole message into the New Testament.
Oh, it sets up like super significant pieces of the Bible are set up with the story of David. with this anointing.
Sin is defeated later on. That's the biggest.
Well, yeah,
battle.
it leads to. I mean, everything in the Bible points to Jesus.
Yeah.
But even if you take that direction out of this conversation, you're just looking at what impact comes from David. David's anointed. He kills Goliath. He rises in his power. He takes over as king.
Takes over God's nation.
Solomon follows and establishes the temple here on earth.
Yep.
Like, there's a lot that occurs because David's anointed in the first place, and that these things transpire. Sure. This isn't like a one-off story of. It's not like Jonah and the whale. Like, this is a very significant piece of human history and our relationship with God because of the way it develops and plays out, not just in this generation. Like we've talked about in the past, how future generations are impacted by the decisions that men make. This is a good example of that because we keep going forward. One of the things outside of the piece with Goliath is when David's being hunted by Saul.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of the next stage, I guess, of David's life. Yeah.
So he's being hunted by Saul, and he's on the run, essentially, kind of on the run a little bit.
100% he's on the run, yeah.
Somehow he always ends up in the positive position while on the run, though. He's running, but ends up in the best position to kill Saul. I think the fact that the way that he carries that out is so, like, it's a character definer.
Yeah,
100%.
Like, they could have just left a lot of that out of scripture, but I think it defines the character of David in a special way because he has the opportunity on 2 occasions that we know of that stand out where he could have killed Saul.
Yep. Before the podcast started, like being a cowboy fan, like, Western style cowboy fan, not the football team.
Not the Star.
Yeah. You end up with a lot of like Native American culture intertwined with that. And, like the Cheyenne Nation believe in touching their enemy 3 times before they kill them. On the 4th time, they kill them. You take their courage the first time, take their bravery the second time, take their willpower the 3rd time. And I feel like that's what King David was doing. Was like, I'm getting as close as I can to make this man as weak as possible. Not that they're the same, but it's very similar messages that I connected with.
Yeah, I thought about it a little. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that whole story, the whole part where, so if everyone who doesn't know out there, if you haven't heard the story, you haven't read the story or heard it. So David is hiding out in a cave. Solomon comes in there to relieve himself, and he actually creeps up behind him while Saul is trying to kill him. Saul kind of turns on David right before that, and he really hates him. He's getting tormented by God, actually.
Jealous.
And so, he tries to actually go out there and kill David, so he's finding him. David's on the run. He goes into a cave. David's in there hiding from Saul. Saul goes in there to relieve himself, and David comes up behind him, slices a piece of his cloth, comes out later and says, "Hey, I could have killed you." And Saul's like, "Oh, sorry, I wasn't trying to kill you. Like, I'm not gonna do that." And then happens again years later where he's out. Saul's chasing him down again, tries to find him. And he's out there sleeping in a field, and he comes out and he takes his spear that's sitting right beside him. David takes a spear and takes his jug of water, and then he comes out and says, "I could have killed you again." And then Saul's like, "Oh shoot, I shouldn't have done that again. Like you actually are going to be the king one day." And he's like, so that's just short. But the part I was thinking about was like, I feel like that is the spot where God really notices and really realizes that David's a man after his own heart, because Saul is trying to kill him.
Yeah.
He's trying to chase him down and kill him, and he has mercy on him twice. And I feel like God has that same heart towards our enemies and towards his enemies, where he has mercy when he does not have to show mercy. And I feel like that's the spot where God's like, David has my own heart because he had mercy on his enemies.
Yep. Yeah. And what I learned after studying it a couple times now is that David, he's gracious towards his enemies, but he's harder on his own self.
Yep.
He's harder on his own sin.
Yeah, he is.
And he's quick to forgive others, but be pretty tough on his own.
Oh, 100%.
Decisions.
He is very hard on himself when he does make a sin, like it's big and it blows up, but he very sorry for that.
He mourns himself.
Yes, and he tries to learn from that. And that's something that, from David's story point of view, it's very tough to like learn from your sins, but David is a really good example of learning from your mistakes, even though he had many close to the end of his life.
There's people out there. I've heard it. That's like, if you're harder on others, you're also hard on yourself. Or if you're lax on others, you're also lax on yourself. David's the opposite of that.
For sure.
He's gracious towards others, but extremely hard on himself, which is
interesting.
A rare quality.
Yeah.
Which is also a leader type quality.
Yeah.
Do you think that's right or wrong?
It's not. I don't know. It's not for me to.
It is. No, you can have an opinion on this.
I think.
Do you think it's right for us to, when we think about the application to a man now, like whenever you're defining how you handle situations in your life, is it
I'm afraid to get burned by somebody.
What about to yourself? Like being super hard on yourself.
Prior to me giving my life to Christ, I couldn't care less. I couldn't care less about my decisions or anything. I didn't care. I didn't weigh them.
Oh, interesting. So you had no conscience wrapped up in the decisions that you made.
Right. Yeah. And then some things played out over time where guilt set in, and I knew what that was. I know what voice that was talking to me. It was Jesus knocking on the door the whole time.
Yep.
Being a gentleman, right? Towards me.
And having that guilt and using that guilt to make a different decision when that situation comes up again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly what David did. Yeah, he didn't make his mistakes 2 times. He didn't make a mistake once and turn from it and didn't make it again.
I mean, I've been in the military, law enforcement. I have a lot of leaders, and those that were hard on others and also hard on themselves, I would more likely get behind them, to be honest.
Yeah, we were talking about that the other night. There was something came up, and like the person who was leading was just really trying to hype it up. Like was just over the top to the point where it was like, I can't even connect with this. Yeah. Like I don't want to be like, this is just too much to handle.
Yeah.
But we were talking about it, like, but they're just showing energy. I was like, but I think that there's a way that you can show that you care so much about what you're doing without being over the top and hyped up about it. Like, I think that you can lead by example. You can lead by not making the same mistake twice, but showing people that you care and that you're invested. I think Daniel is a good example. David is a good example, and because he has this army with him. As a military leader, I would assume, I'm not one, but I would assume it's like our target is in range. We have the ability to execute this, so let's do it. And that would just make total sense. But he doesn't. He's like, that's not what God is. That's not what I'm supposed to be doing in this moment. Like, let's
go down there and bang some stuff together and make them all kill each other instead of us having some blood on our hands.
Well, yeah, but I'm talking about like right here where he's in the sheepfold, like off with the head. Like we're done with this whole thing.
Yeah, the cat and mouse game with Saul. Like quit it. Like cut it out.
Yeah, he ends it immediately if he just wants to. But there's a process he's playing out, but he's leading in that way.
Yeah,
I don't know. I think it's interesting.
As a husband, I am gracious towards my family and harder on myself, if that makes any sense, because I'm trying to lead my family, and also the word patience always comes up, and especially with Scott's message today was like, what's your word of the year for 2024? Mine's patience. And so like instead of being quick to temper, quick to judgment, be patient on it, pray about it, and then come to the decision. And I feel like that's what David does all the time. He goes to God or goes to meditation in some way and makes a decision instead of making his decision that's going to fulfill his needs instead of God's needs. And
we see David's words called on throughout the Bible. The things he wrote, the way he thought through things, the way he dwelled and stuff.
You can tell that's God inspired, man. Like mine's gonna have redneck knees, and every time I write something, and like this guy, him and Solomon, like the wisdom that poured out from them on the pages is amazing.
One of the things I did want to bring up is we're talking about leadership. I might as well stay on this part because this is something I actually learned from reading the story this week. Is like whenever David took his men out and he left his wife and his children and all their wives and children out, and he went and was fighting other armies, and they came back, and the Philistines had came and took their wives and children, and like he had to make that decision as a leader, and he regretted it. He thought it was not a good decision because all of his guys were trying to stone him right after that. Yeah, and so like
a coup almost.
Yeah, so like he had to. I feel like that's something like you have to build on your leadership because it's not something that you just like. He didn't know that was the bad decision when he went and made it at the beginning.
Have you ever had a boss that had like owned up to their mistakes?
Yes. That's the best kind of boss you want.
Absolutely.
But that's someone like I was just saying that they care so much about what's going on. They're invested in it. Yeah. It's not like if you're not invested in the group or you're not invested in the process of the mission, then you don't care. Like
don't care about your Friday afternoon pizza party.
Did you win the battle you went to? Oh, cool. That's a great example. That drives me nuts. Yeah. Like I'm 30 years old. I don't want a pizza party.
Yeah, you're not taking me to Mazio's anymore.
Yeah, like I have had bosses that I respect so much, and I have one now that I respect so much because of the way that they're doing the work too.
Yeah, they're in the trenches with you. Yeah,
This is a process. We care, and if something bad happened as a consequence of our work, they would care about you're talking about here.
I'll share a story with you. So I have my first female boss my entire life. Law enforcement, military, you don't get those very often. And so now I'm in the civilian world. I'm in a corporate environment. I have a market lead, and she's in her 50s. She's single. She's an amazing boss.
Is this a dating profile ad?
No, it's not. Okay. Yeah, I mean, but we got bought out recently. I've shared that with you. And so we have a new name change, new higher up change, all this new stuff going on. And being a home inspector, I sometimes come across locked doors, or I have to drill them out or whatever. And I drilled them out. But the leasing department didn't get everything switched over. And so I'm pretty much breaking and entering almost. She was like, hey, that's all I sent them over there.
Oh, nice. It's awesome.
Like she called the police department and everything. She was like, hey, if you got anybody to put down a piece of paper, put me down, and I would never expect that from other stuff.
Yeah, it's awesome.
I was like, hey, he stepped on that bomb himself.
Yeah, I know, but it's not really. I mean, David is an awesome leader and a great example of it. And I know we're kind of getting off topic about like being a leader, but like David was a leader.
Absolutely,
David was a
the nation was behind him.
We're not getting off topic because that's part of the topic. Yeah, how does this relate? How do we connect with?
Will your boss take a bullet for you?
Yes.
But how will you lead?
Yeah.
More than how are the people around you leading? How are you, like, if you have a kingdom and you're a king, if we're going to stand on these pillars, then you're going to have to lead in some capacity. The decisions you make are going to have positive and negative consequences. How do you react? How do you care? How do you grow through those negative times when something bad happens, like all their families taken? Now, I hope your family's not taken for a decision that you make, but let's say you lose your house.
I have a particular set of skills.
Yeah. So let's just put a button on that last topic, because like David, eventually he's like, crap, I made a mistake. I messed it up. Yeah. Let's go back and let's find our family and get them back. And they end up getting them back. And so he chases after them with 600 of his men, that they get all their wives and kids taken, and they're mad. They're mad at David. And so they end up going across a creek. 2 of them stay behind.
Yes, that's right.
They end up getting, the 400 end up getting all their stuff back and kill all the people and get their stuff back and their kids and their wives. And then they go back across the creek. And this is another leadership spot that I learned. It's like, they were like, the 400 of them were like, we're not sharing with the other 200. Y'all didn't come across the creek and help us, win this battle. But he was like, no, we're all sharing in this. We're all together. And I feel like that's another leadership thing. It was like, I didn't really notice, but like, this is kind of like a leadership podcast today because of David as being a great leader. But he's like, we're all sharing the spoils.
I'm sure we can form by
one
outline.
Team, one fight. We're all the same. So like, let's share the spoils with not only people who came and helped us, but the rest of our team as well. And he even like sent gifts to other people as well after that, like other kings. And I can't remember who it was, but he like sent the spoils to other people. He was like, we have enough as what we need. We can share with others. So another great was like, man, David's so good, and you can learn so much from him, and like. So good that we actually dive into it this week, because I really, really enjoyed it.
A lot of guys that are great warriors, they don't have a softer side. They didn't know how to kill, spill blood, and that's it. They don't know how to, lead and grow a nation. And I feel like most of his direction that he had was coming from God. Yeah. So,
well, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna take a pause. When we come back, we're going to step away from leadership. Yep. We're gonna talk about as the king, but we're going to talk about David and David as a downfall.
Yes.
Yeah. And there's some things that come about. Then we're going to wrap a bow on this thing. We're going to look at what it means, how we can take this story, we can apply it in our daily lives. So hang tight. We'll be right back. All right. So we're back. So we looked at the early stages of the story of David, not Daniel, David. And all of the kind of the character development of who David is. He was anointed as king. He was the smallest of the family. Not that we've pretty much decided we don't think that matters as much with the later parts of the story. It matters in the anointing.
Heart matters
portion.
Over
mission, heart, purpose. Those things are the more important piece here. Yep. David's a great leader. We kind of went on a tangent there. I honestly hadn't really thought through it quite that way until y'all started talking.
Yeah. Is that why like with those in the Jewish faith at that time wanted a military leader for their Messiah?
Because I think they wanted a military leader because they wanted out of Roman occupation.
They were tired of the Romans taking over.
I don't blame them.
Yeah. So I don't think it was so much because he was coming to create a new kingdom, and they wanted it to be like not Rome.
Physical. They were a physical kingdom, not a spiritual kingdom.
Right. Yeah. So I think that's why. Yeah. So David, if we fast forward in his story a little bit, so David becomes king. Yep. David is actually given the vision for the temple on earth. God gives him the vision, but it's not in his timeline. It's going to be in his son Solomon, who come to Pointman January 17th. We'll dive into Solomon one night at Pointman.
Let's go.
Interesting man that people don't know too much about, other than that he's the wisest man who ever lived. But he's got some interesting concubines. Yeah, and those concubines get him in a little bit of trouble.
Spoiler alert.
So there's some interesting stuff in that story. But Solomon goes on to build the temple. But David's the one who gets the vision for it. God gives it to David. He sees it. It just isn't his time to build it.
For sure.
But David becomes king, and David has an issue.
Yes, it does.
So David has the original Peep Show, the original adult film.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So he's on top of the roof of his palace, looking down at all other, because he's the highest point, because he's the biggest, baddest guy there. So he's the king. He's looking down at everybody else. What's also interesting is a part a lot of people don't talk about. We do talk about here at that church, because I've heard it before, Pastor Scott. But he says like he was supposed to be off at war with his people, and he wasn't
doing
there.
what he was supposed to be doing.
Yes, he wasn't doing what he was supposed to be doing, and what God told him to do: go out to war with his men. He was sitting in the palace chilling, and he slept in until like noon one day. He's like, "Why are you sleeping until noon?" Because he knew at the hottest point of the day, the ladies would be out bathing on top of the roofs. And then he got up and he was, checking the girls out, and saw this lady named Bathsheba, who was a beautiful lady. And he took her and he says, "I'm gonna bring that girl to me." And then he ended up, one of his men in his own army that's his wife.
Uriah.
Uriah. So he sleeps
The
with
Hittite.
her. Yeah, he sleeps with her. Commits adultery because he's already married, she's married, but they do it anyway, and then
covers it up.
Yes.
Come on, that's like
tries
1, 2, 3 strikes. Let's go.
Tries to bring Uriah home. So this happens. He sleeps with Bathsheba. Bathsheba gets pregnant. And Uriah, he brings her back from the front lines and's like, "Hey, go be with your wife." You're like, take a break. So we've talked about the leadership of David, like from this positive. Here is the opposite. And here's where
the
we
human aspect of him.
Right. And we see like his flesh overtook his ability to stay on mission, stay on purpose, but also you kind of see it set against this man who is on purpose and is on mission. Because Uriah is like, "No, I'm supposed to be on the front line." So he sleeps at the gate. He doesn't go home.
No.
I'm not.
Because King David had set a precedent for the culture that he expected, and then he's not doing.
That's good. That's great. I didn't think about it that way too. That's a great point.
So he's gone always in the front of everything that he has made a decision of, or so to speak, right? And then now he's doing the complete opposite.
That's good.
Yeah. So he tells us Uriah, after he's already got his wife pregnant, tells Uriah, "Go home and sleep with your wife before you go out back onto the battlefield." And he's like, "I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to sleep with the palace front,
the guards of the palace."
Right. Yeah. And so then he's like, "Well, I guess I'm going to get caught. I'm going to get found out. Let me cover my tracks. I'm going to go ahead and send Uriah to the front of the line and have him go out there and pull everybody else back while he gets killed." Basically, he murdered him. In hindsight.
The first time I heard that whole section of David's story, I was listening to Pastor Jack Graham out of Dallas, Texas. It was on Bible in a Year. And the guy that's narrating was like a British accent, kind of like Morgan Freeman-esque, and it's like so suspenseful. And I'm like, "King David, what are you doing?" I'm driving.
Yeah.
I'm like, I pulled over into a quick trip over there at Otter Creek and listened to the rest of it. And I was like, "What are you doing, man?"
"No, David, you were my boy."
Absolutely. I said, "Man." So, my human side of me is like, I'm judging the heck out of David, and I'm like, maybe I should think about my own undoings.
But I think David sets a standard for like what it means to be a man after God's heart for a long stretch of his life, most of his life. We see this kind of like development of this dude who's
chosen leader.
And he's on mission purpose for God and what God's will for his life is. But then we get to this point where we see him have to make a decision to continue on mission, continue on purpose, or to succumb to the flesh and the desires of his flesh. On the flip side of that, we see a man who has been trained up in this system, like you just mentioned, of putting purpose and mission out front. And he has to make the same decision because he could have gone home.
Absolutely.
I'm going home to my wife.
Yeah.
I've been on the battlefield and the king called me back and gave me permission. I'm going home.
Yeah. What's up, bro?
It's going down.
Go home.
Yeah. He catching me sleeping with the palace guards at the front gate. Like, that's not happening.
Yeah.
But he was so like focused on what he was supposed to be doing.
Around that.
Yeah. But he's focused on what he's supposed to be doing. That he's like, "No, I'm not gonna." Everybody else is out there fighting.
I've seen this movie before. I know how this ends.
But everybody's out there fighting. They're doing their thing. They're on mission still. I'm not succumbing to this. Whereas David's like, I'm bored.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which how many guys have fallen into?
That's how it happens, though. You
have
to
human pornography because literally I'm
busy.
bored.
Yeah, for sure.
That's when the devil creeps in.
Yeah.
When you're bored. Your opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a really good point you made was like, as his life is kind of building up and he's growing and he's learning, he's not doing any of that things that he doesn't need to do. So he's going up in his life and he's doing what he's supposed to do. He's like, I'm not going to do all these things that I shouldn't be doing. And then when he kind of reaches that point where his life is midpoint where he's like, I'm the king now. No one's trying to kill me. I don't really have to fight these battles anymore. That's when he sins. Mm-hmm. That's when he falters. And so it's a good point in our lives where we're like, I'm sure it's coming at some point in my life where I'm like, I got everything I need. I'm comfortable. I'm chilling.
Yeah.
Let's see what else I can do. I'm not going to follow God anymore. I'm going to go see what else I can try to figure out. Or
Pastor Scott preached on the exact same kind of motives today. It was like, hell yeah, you went on a mission trip when you were 13. What are you doing now for God? And, me, I'm like, I'm 34 years old. 33 of those years, I had no mission for God. Let's set a precedent and the remainder, hopefully there's more, but remainder of those years, let's keep the mission for God.
Yeah, what are we doing now? Yeah. What are you doing now for God?
Yeah. Just because you know the word and you did that one thing at one time, like, what are you doing now?
Yeah.
That's great.
But, I mean, a wild story, like someone who does good, and then all of a sudden he's adulterer, and then he murders someone. So, like, he does mess it up again. We're going to probably talk about that again. But, like, that story is just like, man, like you were saying, he's the chosen one.
I was so upset.
He's the chosen one.
I've spoken about how, with the crucifixion of Jesus, like, I mourned him in a way.
For sure.
And it's like, David, man.
Jacking it up.
You let me down, dude.
Yeah. It's funny when you're a kid growing up and you read this story, you don't really, I don't know about you, it didn't compute, like, the intricacy of the story until I was an adult.
Yeah, no, I agree. 100%.
Like, to think through, like, how it all interweaves and connects with, David being who he is. First off, when you're a kid, you don't really read David and Goliath and then David and Bathsheba.
No,
like, those aren't connected in the
that
first place.
You don't learn that until you're later on in your adulthood.
That doesn't show up in the Cliff Notes.
No.
Yeah.
No.
But, when you look at, adulterer, fornicator, and murderer.
Yes.
Like, so
touched on them all.
he spent his whole life, and we're not saying he was perfect and blameless.
We know about him.
We know this section.
Right.
We know this fall that he has here. It's incredible, though, because I think it's, it gives us as people and as men, like, doesn't give you license to go be a pervert and a murderer, but it does give redemption, and gives, like, this feeling of, like, oh, I can do great things for God in my imperfection.
Yeah, you pick your cross up every day. Right.
Yeah, so God he can change those things, right? He can use those things. And he did the same thing in that story where he took that terrible, bad, horrible thing, and he actually, Bathsheba is a great grandmother of Jesus. Yes. I don't know how many greats.
Because of Ruth and Boaz was the grandparents of David.
But yeah, it's David and Bathsheba. Their lineage actually is the birth of Jesus. So, like, he can take things that are terrible and rotten and bad and make them beautiful and great and exactly what he wants them to be.
Well, that's a political topic with abortion and all that too,
But he doesn't. But he doesn't kill the purpose and the mission of David either.
No.
So it wasn't just enough that it was going to become, the lineage was going to work its way out.
Right.
Yeah.
It was in David's life, though, because, David is Solomon's father, which we've mentioned.
Yeah.
So this lineage isn't like, my dad screwed up and now it's game over for our family. Like, that's not how this works.
Yeah.
Like, he works through that, and into the next generation, great things are accomplished. And then Solomon screws up.
Yeah. Well, so before we get into Solomon screwing up, we actually did see another spot where he actually screws up 2 more times, where he actually takes a census of his people.
Yeah.
And God said, do not take a census of your people, because the reason you're thinking about it, I feel like when I read it before, he takes a census of his people, and you're like, why is that such a big deal? But the reason he was taking a census to see how big he was, to see, taxes, and also to see who else he could conquer. He could conquer with his people and his might and his strength. And God's like, let me take care of that. Don't worry about how many people you have. Like, if I need you to conquer somebody, I'm going to conquer, I don't need you to count how many people you have so you can say, I got, so many amounts of people, millions of people, so I can go conquer other nations. Don't do that. So he ends up doing that, and he gets paid, very costly sins because of that.
Counting your chickens before they hatch. Yeah. Is that the same?
I mean, kind of like, I'm going to count all my people so I know how many people I can conquer. But so then God gives him 3 different, so I'm going to punish you one of 3 different ways. Your enemies can punish you. I'm going to send a, what are the one who he said, I can send a plague on your people and kill your people. Or then, what was the third one? I just read it.
What I brought out, that was like he did manage his household correctly.
Yeah, so... ended up having a plague on the nation, and 100,000 people die, or 100,000. I'm sorry, I messed the story up.
It's a legion or
I
something.
just read it, yeah. But he said, I want to take my punishment from God and not from people, because people are not merciful. God is merciful. So he could have come down and he said, I'm going to have God come and wipe all my people out, but God will have mercy. He's not going to completely wipe us out. But if you let people come and take and come and destroy, people are not merciful.
No, we're not.
God is.
Yeah, look at our judicial system that we have.
Yeah,
it's not perfect.
No,
God's is.
Yeah, I'd rather have God's mercy than people's mercy, for sure.
Yeah.
You have to have God's standard, though, if you have God's mercy.
Yeah. I don't.
No, we do.
And then kind of later on in his life, where he should be dealing with his kids start acting like a fools later on in his life, and he doesn't deal with them decisively like he should.
Didn't manage that house, man.
No, didn't manage his household, and he should have. So he checks it up 3 different big times in the Bible, even though I'm sure he did mess it up some more times in his life as well.
Yeah, David, the generational connection in David is pretty crazy.
I love it.
Like, looking at how he impacts the next generation and how his growth and how his screw ups and how his successes and how God's view of him is and how he handled himself in the eyes of God and how that transfers to his kids. That's a pretty good lesson for us, I think.
Yeah, no doubt.
I mean, it's a very visual representation of the things that we theoretically talk about a lot of times.
Yeah, is that what you think makes David great? Is he's the graciousness that he gives to his people, and he's tough on himself?
I think David's greatness is in his obedience to God.
Yeah. Yep.
I think that is David's greatness.
He's the only man in the Bible that is classified as a man after God's own heart.
Because he's set on glorifying God.
Yeah. Oh, so he was willing and honest to admit his mistakes, and that's the first step of dealing with something and turning from it. And then he is also forgiving and does not, but when he was forgiven, he wasn't removed of his consequences of those sins. Like, he still got the burdens of those sins that he committed. And
he didn't get an early pardon?
No, did not get pardoned at all. And then God greatly desires our complete and trust and worship. He trusted God and he worshiped God. He knew God was God. So, yes, he was a good forgiving guy, but he was also trusted God no matter what. You see that in his stories if you read them. He trusted God no matter what.
The Psalms, I'm not quiet enough in my head to let God speak enough to me sometimes,
Yeah, that's something we didn't really talk a lot. We mentioned it briefly that David does write many psalms.
Half the psalms.
And we see him play out in places like in the story of Jonah. When Jonah is praying, he's actually reciting part of the psalms that David had written. His works were works that the Jewish people and the people at that time would have not just read, but they would have memorized. Yes. They would have said, and they would have sang, and they would have.
Jesus is quoted to say part of the psalms on
the cross.
On the cross.
Yes. Right.
So it's a big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why have you been
part of their DNA is what David wrote.
Yeah. I'm a little envious of their envious and glad we don't have to do it. But their attention to detail and the Old Testament things, because they would have known the first 5 books of the Bible, essentially
and all 612 of the Leviticus, the laws.
Yeah.
They would have known all of it
by memory. Yeah. They would have essentially just had this as part of their life, and then they would have recited, said, verbally passed down the Psalms.
Yeah.
To the point they would have known those. To the point where Jonah's dying. Yeah. And in his prayer he's like, oh, I remember this thing David said one time. That's what it came back to.
Us quoting movies.
Yeah.
Except for not on the same level, but
our movies are stupid.
Yes. Most of ours are Step Brothers super bad, but or some Ricky Bobby stuff, and it's really people quoting David over Will Ferrell.
Yeah, or some song.
Yeah.
I heard that at some point in my life where the human brain is more inept to learn and memorize stories, and that's why it's so good. You can bring back stories in your brain way more than just general information.
Oh man, yes. I went down that rabbit hole of the history of the Old Testament, and I guess they call it the quiet period, or the 400 years before Jesus, where there was nothing going on.
Yeah,
and the stories were still getting passed down all the time, through handwritings and whatever else. But early on, before the Dead Sea Scrolls that they had discovered, that was through word of mouth. The word of God was.
It's still even if you have a text, it would have been passed down verbally to most people,
and it was accurate.
Yeah, because it was memorized.
Yeah,
and it was transposed.
Now we have nowadays people that have every device known to man to pull up that information, and they're changing it.
That's laziness.
Yeah,
more than anything.
Could be the devil too.
One thing I would task people who are listening to this to do is go to the Hall of Faith in Hebrews 11 because it talks about David in there as well.
Yeah.
Kind of read through those stories of those men and go through, like, if you read a man that you never heard of, go look at see where his story's at and read it.
Good.
Because the Hall of Faith is so good about, like, for us to learn, and that's what we're doing here as well, is like kind of picking and choosing men in the Bible who we're talking about. But like those guys in that Hebrews Hall of Fame in Hebrews 11, David is one of those main characters in that Hall of Faith, and that's why we can learn so much from him. But like, I encourage you to get your Bible out, turn to that chapter, pick a guy's name you never heard of, read a story, because I promise you you'll learn something from it.
Sad that Samson's in there and Jonah's not.
Yeah, Samson is in there.
Jonah is a different thing. We may talk about Jonah next week. I was thinking a little bit about him.
Sure.
All right, to wrap up David.
Sure.
All right, so David's greatness is in his devotion to God.
Mm-hmm.
His willingness to push forward God's mission and purpose in his life. That's David's greatness. David's downfall is clearly that he is a little bit of a pervert, murderer, adulterer.
Yep.
There's a lot going on here.
Yep.
David's
All sins are created equal.
Pride.
he screws up.
Mm-hmm.
He makes some bad moves there. How do we look at this and how do we apply it?
I say beginning of his life, you can look at he was a giant killer. He had faith in God more than any other else. And you're going to have giants in your life. This is exactly what everybody preaches about when you hear about David and Goliath. You're going to have those giants in your life. Look to David and be like, he's nothing because I have God. That situation is nothing because I have God. Be like David, where you have that faith and that devotion and that just utter strength you get because God is on your side. And the story is the opposite. Goliath had nothing on God. So Goliath was David in the story.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
That's good. Yeah, no, I've never really thought about it that way. I like it. Yeah.
Yeah, just think about, because, prior to that, with Joshua, and, God made giant hell balls fall from the sky for, for him to win the battle.
Right.
You're like, that's the same God that David had.
Amen.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, the thing I think that we can take from it is that what we do in our life has a direct impact on what the impact of our family and our kids. Like the decisions that we make impact the generations that follow us, and so we have to be very attuned to one. If we can stick to David's example of like, hey, let's say focus on God's mission for our life. Yeah. Let's stay inside of the lanes and the lines that God has lined out for us. Then let's transfer that into the next generation and let's help grow them up to do the same thing, to stay inside of those lines. Clearly, David screws up. His kids are not perfect.
Yep.
He lets his kids run amok. Our kids are going to make wrong decisions at times, and they're going to screw up. Your kids are too, if you didn't know that.
Yeah.
it's inevitable.
If you're perfect and you figured out how to keep them from doing it, call me, because I want to know.
Bring on the podcast.
We'll have a parenting episode, and we want you to be a part of it. Yeah. What anything for you specifically out of this?
With King David, when his weakest moments, he had loyalty within the guys that he had, and he leaned on them and God, right?
Mm-hmm.
He was a band of rebels, right? Worthless rebels.
He did have a group of just people who were.
He wasn't the band of worthless.
That's right.
But
he had a group of people with him,
yes,
right? And he wasn't alone. Obviously, if he was alone, he wasn't alone with God.
Mm-hmm.
And so, well, we've talked about in the past how it's not biblically, like, God will only give you so much you can handle. That's not true, right?
Mm-hmm.
God will give you more than you can handle. You got to lean on God to handle it.
Yep.
And so I feel like that's David's bread and butter the entire time.
Good, yeah.
And even though he makes his own fleshly downfall mistakes, God uses them for positive.
And he changes his ways.
Yeah. Like, we're going to sin every day, but are you going to lean on God for forgiveness and, grace during that weak moment, that vulnerability? And Scott talked about it today, was talking about being vulnerable with your spouse and praying and all that. You were talking to your father when you're praying. Be vulnerable to him. Yeah. He already knows what you did, right?
Yes, good.
Just confess it with your mouth.
Yeah.
And I feel like David, he's the person I learned how to pray from, I guess, from a biblical person in the Bible. Most of those guys don't talk about that in the other books. They do, but David, it's a profound part of his life.
Amen.
Before we wrap, one kind of minor thing I think that we can take from this is the conversation around leadership and the conversation about the type of leader that you're going to be.
Yeah. Be the leader that you want others to have.
Be the leader people are willing to follow.
Oh, yeah.
Be the leader your family's willing to follow. I heard it was Erwin McManus. He was talking about how the word submission has never had to come up in their household. because he's
good.
never going to set
trigger word
a
for
vision so low that his wife has to work to submit to it. He's going to do his best to level up their entire life to the point that it's her submission is easy. That she is able to submit to his role because he's elevated the role to a point where it's hard. She shouldn't have to work to be under submission to his husband. It's not talking about David, but I'm talking about how, like, in our life when we're working through this leadership thing, like, these people are willing to follow David. They're willing to submit to the leadership of David. They could have killed the man hunting them twice, but they didn't because David told them not to. Essentially.
They trusted his judgment.
Be the man who's willing to elevate life to the point where even if you have those that are in submission to you, they don't have to struggle to be in submission to you. Good. That they can, that you can bring them up even in their submission.
Don't be an awkward leader.
Don't be over the top for no reason. Just help to make people know that you care, you're willing to do the work.
You think he wouldn't have pizza party on a Friday?
Pizza party on the Friday. It's the worst kind of leader. If you're a boss out there and you have pizza party Fridays, your employees hate you.
Here's your Christmas gift card.
I like pizza on a Friday.
I go to work so I can afford to buy pizza.
There you go.
I don't pay me $5. I'll decide if I want pizza or tacos.
What about ice cream?
Give me
I don't give me any of that crap.
Give me a day off.
Yeah, I don't go. Like, every time we have those, I'm like, I'm working from home today. I'd rather just work for that hour.
I like a pizza party and ice cream Friday. That's just me.
Yeah, David has
some everybody hates you except for Luke.
I think you're cool.
I'm just kidding. This has been the Pointman podcast. We've talked about David. This is week 2 of our Act Like a Man series. Before you get out of here, like and subscribe. The semester is right around the corner. January the 17th, 6:30 p.m. That Church Sherwood, That Church Cabot. You want to be in the room. I guarantee it. It's going to be an awesome semester. We've got giveaways. We've got some sweet Act Like a Man sweatshirts. We got to reorder some because we already sold out. So what's up with that? So make sure that you were there. Plan. That's it. Yeah. All the guys who wanted larges, mediums, and extra larges already bought all these jokers. But we will see you on the 17th at Sherwood for Act Like a Man. We are talking about 4 specific men from the Old Testament. And then make sure you like and subscribe here, as we will have more episodes just like this to help bless your life.
It's been fun.
Yep.
Peace out.
See you.